The school stood at the edge of town, a hulking structure of red brick and cracked windows. It had been abandoned for years, but whispers about it never faded. Children dared each other to approach it, and some swore they saw lights flickering in the windows at night. The adults dismissed the tales as childish nonsense. Still, no one ventured near St. Hope's Elementary after dark. Except for us. We were 5 bored teenagers with nothing better to do on Halloween night. The plan was simple. Sneak into the school, explore, and stay until midnight. Just a bit of fun, James had said, grinning as he stuffed flashlights into his backpack. Unless you're chicken, none of us backed down, though unease hung in the air as we climbed through the broken window. The school smelled of mildew and decay. Our footsteps echoed down the empty halls, the sound unnaturally loud in the silence. "This place is a dump," Sarah said, her voice shaky. She stayed close to Ryan, who was trying to play it cool but kept glancing nervously over his shoulder. Emma clutched her camera, determined to catch something paranormal on film. "All right," James said, turning to us with a mischievous grin. "Split up, explore, and meet back here in 20 minutes. "No way," Sarah protested immediately. "I'm not going anywhere alone." "Fine," James said with a shrug. "Groups of 2. Let's go." I ended up paired with Emma. As we wandered down a corridor, the air grew colder, and our breath turned visible. "That's not normal," Emma whispered, adjusting her camera nervously. The lockers lining the hall were rusted, their doors hanging open like broken jaws. Graffiti covered the walls. Names, symbols, and one phrase repeated over and over. "We see you." "Who wrote that?" Emma asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know," I replied, but the hair on the back of my neck prickled. We turned a corner and found ourselves outside the gymnasium. The doors were slightly ajar, and faint music drifted out, the sound scratchy and distant, like an old record player. "Do you hear that?" Emma asked, her camera shaking in her hands. I nodded, swallowing hard. We pushed the doors open, and the music grew louder. Inside, the gym looked untouched by time. The wooden floor gleamed, and colorful banners hung from the ceiling. But what froze us in place was the row of children sitting on the bleachers. They were perfectly still, dressed in outdated uniforms, their faces pale and lifeless. Their eyes, empty, black pits, seemed to stare right through us. "Run," I managed to choke out, grabbing Emma's arm. We bolted out of the gym, the music abruptly cutting off behind us. As we sprinted down the hall, a faint, chilling giggle echoed around us. We found James and Ryan in the science lab. They were pale, their flashlights flickering. "Something's here," Ryan said, his voice trembling. We heard footsteps, and whispering. Sarah burst into the room moments later, slamming the door behind her. "I saw someone," she gasped. "In the hallway. A teacher, I think. But his face, it wasn't right." The lights in the room flickered violently, and the temperature plummeted. A loud thud came from the hallway, followed by slow, deliberate footsteps. They stopped just outside the door. We held our breath as the doorknob twisted slowly. Then it stopped. A deep, guttural voice rasped, "You shouldn't be here." The door burst open, and the lights went out completely. Chaos erupted. Something cold and unseen grabbed my arm, dragging me toward the hallway. I screamed, kicking and flailing, until James yanked me free. We ran blindly through the darkness, the others close behind, until we found an open window and scrambled out. Outside, the air was warm again, and the school stood silent and dark, as if nothing had happened. We didn't stop running until we were far from St. Hope's. Later that night, as we tried to make sense of what we'd experienced, Emma checked her camera. Her face turned pale as she scrolled through the photos. "You need to see this," she whispered, handing it to me. The pictures showed us inside the school, but we weren't alone. In every photo, shadowy figures stood behind us, their hollow eyes gleaming in the darkness. The last photo made my blood run cold. It showed all of us huddled in the science lab, except there were 6 of us in the frame. Standing among us was a teacher, his face distorted and his empty eyes staring directly into the lens. Underneath, scrawled in blood-red letters, were the words, "Class dismissed. The weeks after that night blurred into unease and denial. None of us spoke about what happened, not even among ourselves. The memory of the shadowy figures, the ghostly children, and the teacher with his hollow eyes weighed heavily on us. Every sound, every shadow, felt like it carried part of St. Hope's with it. But the school wasn't done with us. It started subtly. Sarah's phone would ring in the middle of the night, but when she answered, there was only faint giggling. Ryan began to wake up with scratches on his arms, too clean and precise to be accidental. Emma swore she saw a figure standing at the edge of her yard some nights, just watching. And James? James went quiet. The same boy who had dared us all to go into the school now rarely left his house. When I visited him, he looked pale and gaunt, muttering about unfinished lessons. His room smelled faintly of mildew, like the school itself had followed him home. Then the dream started. I'd find myself back at St. Hope's, wandering its endless halls. In the dreams, the corridors stretched on forever, the walls covered with the same graffiti. "We see you." Sometimes, I'd hear the music from the gymnasium, faint and scratchy, luring me closer. Other nights, I'd hear the teacher's voice echoing. "Class is in session." Each dream ended the same way, with me standing in the gym, surrounded by those lifeless children. They would slowly turn their heads toward me, their hollow eyes boring into my soul, and then I'd wake up drenched in sweat. One night I couldn't take it anymore. I called Emma. "We need to go back," I blurted out. "Are you insane?" she hissed. "Why would you even think that?" "Because it's not going to stop," I said. "It's following us, Emma. We left something unfinished, and it won't let us go until we fix it." After much arguing, she reluctantly agreed. We convinced Sarah, Ryan, and James to join us, though James needed little convincing. He looked almost eager, his eyes wild and distant. We returned to St. Hope's on a cold, moonless night. The building seemed to loom larger than before, as if it had been waiting for us. The broken window we had used before was now boarded up, but the main doors, once locked tight, swung open with an eerie creak. Inside, the air was heavy, pressing down on us like a physical weight. The graffiti was gone, replaced by pristine white walls. The lockers were no longer rusted, and the floors gleamed as if freshly polished. It was as if the school had come alive again, trapped in a frozen moment of time. "This isn't right," Sarah whispered, clutching Ryan's arm. "No," James said, his voice distant. "This is how it's supposed to be." We followed him down the hall, the sound of our footsteps swallowed by the oppressive silence. The lights flickered overhead, their buzzing growing louder the farther we went. When we reached the gymnasium, the doors were already open. The scene inside was almost identical to my dreams. The gym floor shone like it had been waxed that morning. The banners swayed gently, though there was no breeze, and on the bleachers sat the same lifeless children, their hollow eyes fixed on us. The music started again, faint and haunting. James stepped forward, his face twisted in a mixture of terror and resignation. "This is where it happened," he said. "This is where it always happens." "What are you talking about?" I demanded, grabbing his arm. But before he could answer, the gym door slammed shut behind us. The temperature plummeted, and the lights dimmed, leaving us bathed in a sickly, greenish glow. The children on the bleachers began to move, their heads tilting in unison as they stood and descended onto the gym floor. Their movements were jerky, almost puppet-like. The whispers started again, growing louder with each passing second. "You came back. You shouldn't have come back." Then he appeared. The teacher emerged from the shadows, his towering frame imposing and unnatural. His face was distorted, his hollow eyes glowing faintly. He carried a ruler in one hand, its edges jagged and sharp. "You've disrupted my class again," he said, his voice echoing unnaturally. "And now you'll never leave." James fell to his knees, muttering, I'm sorry," over and over again. The rest of us screamed, but it was useless. The teacher raised the ruler, and the children surged forward, their cold hands grabbing at us. I don't know how I escaped. One moment, I was being dragged down by those lifeless children. The next, I was outside, gasping for air as the school loomed silently behind me. Sarah and Emma were with me, their faces pale and streaked with tears. Ryan and James never made it out. The police never found any trace of them. The report said they probably ran away, though I knew the truth. St. Hope's had claimed them, just like it had claimed so many others. The nightmares haven't stopped. Sometimes, I hear James's voice in my dreams, begging for help. Sometimes, it's the teacher, his hollow eyes burning into me. And sometimes, I hear the music again, faint and scratchy, luring me back to the gym. I know one thing for sure. St. Hope's isn't done with us. And someday it will call me back.